Hello everyone. Today we will learn about another case, the case of Gail Clevenger. Our story takes place in DeBary, a small town in Florida near Orlando. Gail Clevenger, a 46-year-old mother and wife, is one of 6 children in a large family. Growing up in a dysfunctional home, she endured abuse from her parents. Not only did they struggle with alcoholism, but they also neglected their children, often falling into poverty and barely able to provide for the family. Gail had 4 sisters and a brother. Despite the misery and chaos of their home life, they found support in one another. Growing up in an unstable family made her fearless and independent. Gail remained strong, positive, and friendly. The difficulties she faced only strengthened her spirit. Throughout her life, Gail had a passion for art. She played the violin as a child. She dreamed of pursuing her talents in music and art, but quickly realized that achieving her goals would be difficult without her parents' support. As a result, she chose to work in a more practical and profitable field. In 1990, she graduated from high school and enrolled at the University of Miami to study architecture. Gail was highly intelligent, achieving excellent academic results and graduating with honors. As a young and energetic woman, she felt ready to take on any challenge. Although architecture is often seen as a difficult field, especially for women, Gail found her first job within a month and quickly advanced in her career. By the mid-1990s, she was in a serious relationship and had married her boyfriend. Unfortunately, their relationship was troubled from the beginning and soon became abusive. The trauma from her childhood resurfaced, and Gail faced a difficult battle. With the support of close friends, she was able to escape her husband's manipulation. They helped her numerous times and assisted her in obtaining a restraining order. Leaving this abusive marriage was a pivotal moment for her. The only bright spot during this time was the birth of her son, Gregory Logan Ramos, for whom she was able to secure full custody. Gail always hopes to find love and happiness. In the early 2000s, she met Danny, a calm and family-oriented man. She felt that her luck was finally changing and that she could build the loving family she had always dreamed of. Initially cautious, she grew more confident in Danny's suitability as a partner over time. About a year later, they decided to get married. By 2018, Gail was living with Danny, her son Gregory, and Danny's children, who had been abandoned by their biological mother. This new family gave Gregory a brother and a sister. During this period, Gail was thriving at work, but she faced challenges in her personal life, particularly with her biological son, Gregory. From an early age, Gregory exhibited limited social skills. While he had a few friends, he often struggled to fit in, particularly when confronted with new or unfamiliar situations. Worried about your child's condition, Gail wanted to help him develop social confidence. She enrolled him in karate classes, hoping that participating in a sport would boost his self-esteem and help him communicate better with peers. Unfortunately, the relationship between the siblings in the family did not develop as she expected. Gail put in a lot of effort to connect with her son. Many people recognized her as a caring and devoted mother who did everything for him. In her free time from work, she worked hard to create a nurturing environment for his upbringing, one that she had missed out on during her own childhood. She believed it was important for him to focus on his education and career, but her attempts to communicate this seemed to go unheard. At this time, the family lived in a large house where 15-year-old Gregory and his siblings each had their own rooms. Gail felt proud to have achieved her dream of a happy family life. However, not everyone shared her positive outlook. Gregory was in middle school, where he had a small circle of friends, but overall, he struggled to fit into society. His performance in class was average. He didn't stand out in any particular way and lacked enthusiasm for school activities. It seemed that his mother was more invested in his achievements than he was. He rarely met up with friends outside of school and preferred to spend most of his time alone in his room playing video games. His main hobby was gaming. and he also enjoyed listening to loud music late into the night in his room. During this time, he got into many conflicts and fights, attracting the attention of the police. His mother did her best to protect him from trouble and managed to persuade the police to give them a chance to sort things out. A psychologist then worked with Gregory and determined that he had no intelligence or developmental issues. Rather, he was simply too lazy to succeed and achieve his goals. At the age of 15, this situation was further complicated by the difficult transition period Gregory was experiencing. Gail was very concerned about her son's legal issues. She recognized that nothing serious had happened so far, but she feared that if they couldn't get him under control, it could lead to more significant problems. To address this, she tried to redirect Gregory's focus from video games to his studies. The consistent pressure from his mother resulted in improved academic performance. He began to do better in school. However, Gregory disliked any interference in his life and resisted her efforts. At the end of 2018, his grades started to decline again. He struggled with several new topics across different subjects. His mother attempted to explain everything to him, but Gregory stubbornly refused to listen. Gail and her children collaborated to encourage Gregory in his studies. On November 1, 2018, Danny and his children went to visit relatives in another city, leaving Gail alone with Gregory. Despite the lack of support during their discussion about his education, Gail continued to motivate Gregory, hoping to steer him back on track. That evening, she checked his grades and noticed that he was falling below the passing mark. Concerned, she arranged another talk with him, stressing the importance of focusing on his education to earn a good diploma, which would help him get into college and build a future. As usual, the rebellious teenager Gregory listened without displaying much emotion. The next morning, Gregory went to school as usual. He remained quiet and reserved, interacting only with a small group of friends. After school, he returned home around 3 p.m. The emergency services received a worrying call from a boy who identified himself as 15-year-old Gregory Logan Ramos. He reported that upon his return from school, he found the door to his home broken and the interior in disarray. He hesitated to go further inside, worried that an intruder might be hiding there. Gregory had been at school all day and was anxious because his mother's car was in the driveway, yet everything inside was eerily quiet. He feared that his mother might be in trouble. Gregory hadn't seen her and thought she could be at work, possibly borrowing someone else's car or getting a ride from a colleague that morning. However, the broken door and the mess inside raised concerns about his mother's safety. The dispatcher spoke with Gregory to gather more information about the situation, and a patrol car was sent to their home. When the officers arrived, they found Gregory waiting outside, visibly upset. He pointed out the broken door and appeared very distressed. By then, neighbors had noticed the commotion and approached to offer support. Gregory attempted to call his mother several times, but each attempt went unanswered. The police quickly searched the house, but found nothing out of the ordinary. There were no bloodstains or other signs of danger. They assessed the damage inside and concluded that the intruder seemed intent on destruction rather than theft. The officers wondered why the neighbors hadn't heard anything during such a chaotic event, but everyone just shrugged, seemingly indifferent. Gregory believed the robber had entered their home while he was at school. The most concerning issue was the disappearance of Gail. Gregory was extremely anxious, prompting the authorities to take him to a local medical center for evaluation and possible calming medication. The situation was further complicated by the lack of other family members present. Aside from Gail and Gregory, no one else was in the house. Although there were suspicions of revenge from the ex-husband, this theory was quickly ruled out because he had a solid alibi, confirmed by colleagues and surveillance footage showing he was at work. Gregory was deeply affected by the break-in and his mother's disappearance. He was later taken to the police station for a more in-depth discussion, where they hoped he would cooperate. However, Gregory was reluctant to assist. He took considerable time to think through his answers. His initial shock and confusion shifted to focus and anxiety. The officers noticed fresh scratches and bruises on Gregory's body, indicating he had been in some sort of struggle. He also had bruises under his eyes, and his face and hands were badly scraped. When asked about the incident, Gregory mentioned that he had been involved in a fight at school. However, when pressed for details and the names of the boys involved, he struggled to express himself clearly. He failed to mention the names of those who had instigated the conflict, and his responses seemed vague, as if he were making up a story on the spot. Sensing that the police were skeptical of his account, Gregory began to shy away from the topic during the questioning. One detective noticed the inconsistencies in his statements and started to focus on Gregory's body language. As the interrogation continued, Gregory grew increasingly anxious. The officers began to doubt his credibility. Gregory frequently played with his hair, rubbed his leg and arm, covered his eyes with his hand while responding, and crossed his limbs, all of which indicated his discomfort and desire to withdraw from the conversation. The detectives were piecing together the timeline of events from the past 2 days, focusing on the time he had spent alone with his mother at home to determine their next steps. One officer observed that Gregory could recount his morning routine and his return home from school with precise timing, as if he had rehearsed it. Gregory struggled to remember when he had last had dinner or the last time he saw his mother. This indicated that he was trying to focus on the timeline to avoid inconsistencies in his story, but he hadn't considered all the details, which left him unable to answer questions. The detectives were suspicious of Gregory, although his age made them hesitant. As the interrogation continued, one investigator wanted to learn about Gregory's relationship with his mother. Gregory became increasingly anxious. He repeatedly claimed he did not kill his mother, even though no one had asked him about it. He started talking about a group of friends he described as suspicious, suggesting that the police investigate them. By this point, Gregory had changed his story multiple times, and the police were closely monitoring the inconsistencies in his account. They kept pressing him for clarification. Eventually, he felt it was time to tell the truth. Gregory explained that the turning point happened the day before he called for help when he returned home from school. His mother slapped him for getting bad grades. Normally, she didn't react so violently, but this time, she lost control because he had failed biology. He reported that Gail began to hit and insult him. The situation escalated, forcing Gregory to defend himself. During the struggle, he managed to overpower his mother, but accidentally went too far. Realizing what had happened, he panicked and didn't understand his actions. In a state of confusion, he decided to hide his mother's body in a car and drove away to figure out what to do next. After the incident, he experienced a nervous breakdown and had several thoughts of ending his own life, but each time he managed to resist those urges. He wandered through the city and its outskirts until he discovered a quiet spot. There, he noticed a large blackened area from a campfire and started to dig. After digging a hole, Gregory pulled his mother's body out of the car and placed it in a shallow grave. He attempted to remove her wedding ring to sell it, but it wouldn't come off. Frustrated, he even tried cutting off her finger, but only injured it. Eventually, he left everything as it was, covered the hole with dirt and leaves, and went home as if nothing had happened. Feeling very tired, he planned to rest and go to school the next morning. His behavior was so calm that none of his classmates noticed anything unusual when they were questioned later. However, Gregory's troubles didn't end there. After returning home, he realized that his mother's sudden disappearance would raise suspicions. So, before school, he decided to fake a break-in and robbery. He planned to call the police when he got back. As he began his act in the morning, he found it too noisy and cumbersome to do alone, so he thought about recruiting his friends. According to the police, he successfully staged the break-in, aided by his knowledge of forensics, which he had gained from attending a related club. Gregory's friends Dylan Seglerek and Brian Porras, drove over in the morning to pick him up for school. And on the way, Gregory made several significant mistakes. First, he couldn't keep quiet about his crime. He openly told his friends, Dylan and Brian, that he had killed his mother, even showing some pride in his confession. Gregory also asked his classmates to help him stage the crime scene. However, they thought it was a joke and were more interested in exploring someone else's house. After school, the group planned to search through Gregory's house. They skipped their last class and went to his house. Inside, there was no trace of his mother's body, but the house was a mess. The state of the house was a result of the three teenagers joyfully destroying everything after Gregory had let them. Meanwhile, the police noticed that some items were untouched. These belonged to Gregory and included a hunting rifle from his father, a hunting bow, a gaming computer, and other valuable possessions. After trashing the house, his friends wished him luck and left. However, their plan was not yet finished. Gregory contacted the police and pretended to be a scared son during the investigation. Some of Gail's belongings were found with Dylan, leading to his confession. It was more challenging to get a confession from Brian, who adamantly denied his involvement in the destruction. With the assistance of his friends, a timeline of events was reconstructed and verified by Gregory. It was clear that the act was carefully planned. It appeared to be premeditated murder rather than self-defense. By that time, many people who knew the Clevenger family had been interviewed, and they confirmed that Gregory had always been a troublemaker. They were not surprised that Gregory was capable of such an act. Despite the gravity of the situation, all three detainees were joking and having fun in the police station, unaware of the seriousness of their circumstances. Dylan and Brian might have expected a less severe consequence than a murder charge, but it was crucial to determine their actual involvement in the crime. After being questioned, all three individuals were taken to the Juvenile Justice Department and held in detention. Gail's body was found exactly where it had been indicated. Gregory had attempted to hide the grave, but did so carelessly, leaving part of her leg visible above the ground. The medical examiner determined that the cause of death was strangulation. On November 4, 2018, 15-year-old Gregory Ramos was charged with first-degree murder of his mother, improper handling of a body, and tampering with evidence to avoid punishment. The hearings were filled with emotion. Gregory cried frequently and offered apologies to everyone present. Many felt that he did not genuinely regret his actions, but was instead trying to reduce his culpability. His family attended the courtroom. They were shocked by the events. Danny and his children were struggling to cope with Gail's death, as they had all loved her deeply. Several statements were made during the hearings. Gregory asked for mercy for his friends Brian and Dylan, insisting they were not involved in the crime. He repeated this claim, but the prosecution focused solely on the facts, continuing the investigation. According to Gregory, he and his friends were unaware of the full extent of the crime, and his friends did not believe that his mother had been murdered. When he realized the severity of the situation, he tried to make light of it, fabricating a story to explain why chaos ensued at home. Considering Gregory's age, he had a good chance of being acquitted or receiving a very light sentence. To reach a compromise, the prosecution proposed a plea deal. Because he was a minor, Gregory was not facing the death penalty, but if he confessed, he could avoid life imprisonment. Gregory accepted the deal and explained that he had an argument with his mother over a bad grade that evening. He did not argue back. Instead, he went to his room, slammed the door, and tried to sleep, but he couldn't. While Gregory was trying to sleep in his room, Gail called her husband, who was out of town, visiting relatives with their children. She told him about the argument with Gregory, and he reassured her, promising to come back in a couple of days to address the situation. The hurtful words his mother had said during the argument kept playing in Gregory's mind. Eventually, he left his room and confronted his mother again. and the argument escalated. In a moment of rage, Gregory attacked her, strangling her with his bare hands for about half an hour until she stopped breathing. It's important to note that during that time, he could have chosen to calm down and stop, making it difficult to classify his actions as unintentional. The court sentenced Gregory to 45 years in prison, allowing for parole after 25 years. He would also be on probation for the rest of his life. Although Gregory sought a lighter sentence, his friends faced difficulties. They were threatened with up to 30 years in prison following preliminary hearings. Their bail was denied. Gregory's history of mental illness, which raised concerns about the risk of self-harm or flight. Dylan was held without bail for 309 days, with bail set at $200,000, a sum beyond his family's financial means. By February 8, 2021, he had spent 828 days in the county jail and had not yet pleaded guilty to aiding and abetting the murder, leaving a jury trial pending. During the hearings, the prosecution lacked sufficient evidence to prove Dylan's involvement, leading the judge to propose a compromise. Ultimately, Dylan was sentenced to 10 years of probation. Brian experienced the least hardship. After preliminary hearings, he was allowed to post bail of $100,000. He faced standard restrictions during the investigation, but was able to complete his schooling and enroll in college without violating any conditions. On July 8, 2021, Brian appeared in court. His lawyers argued that over the 3 years he spent free, he had demonstrated that he was a responsible member of society and posed no threat to anyone. On the other side, Gail's family, including Danny and his children, believed that Brian, as a co-conspirator in the violent act, should serve at least 828 days in prison, just like his friend Dylan. They argued that he should receive the same punishment, followed by 10 years of probation. Brian's lawyer attempted to persuade the jurors that Brian had become a victim of his friend's poor choices and lack of judgment. Although Brian was involved in the incident, his age limited his understanding of the situation. Meanwhile, the prosecution maintained that he deserved punishment. They pointed out that Brian failed to report the incident to the police, despite being aware of his friend's confession about the murder of his mother. The defense countered by stating that neither Dylan nor Brian truly believed Gregory's claims. Ultimately, Brian was given a conditional sentence. Danny believes that Gregory's accomplices should have faced harsher penalties. He and others think they assisted Gregory in digging a grave and hiding his mother's body. This suggests that Gregory recruited his friends not just for the attack, but also for the burial. However, eventually, Danny stated that he had forgiven the teenagers, as he realized that no amount of anger or desire for revenge would bring his wife back. He chose to move on from the situation. The case of Bain family. David Cullen Bain was born on March 27, 1972, as the first child of Robin and Margaret Bain, who had married in 1969 when David was 2 years old. Robin decided to become a missionary teacher in Papua New Guinea, so the family moved to Papua New Guinea while living there. The family grew to include 3 more children. David became the oldest sibling, followed by 2 younger sisters, Arawa and Laniet, born 3 years apart, and a younger brother, Stephen, 8 years his junior. During their time in Papua New Guinea, Margaret developed an interest in spiritualism. She began believing in spirits and felt the family needed protection from satanic influences over time. Robin's dream of becoming a missionary teacher faded after 14 years. In 1988, the family returned to New Zealand and settled in a large house in Anderson Bay, Dunedin. 3 years later, Robin was appointed headmaster of a small school. However, as promising as this new job sounded, their family still faces many difficulties, and their finances were unstable. By 1994, The relationship between Robin and Margaret had completely broken down. They argued so often that she could no longer bear his presence. She even contemplated the possibility of his death. The family no longer lives normally. The members become cold, and the house is seriously neglected over time. The home fell into disrepair, but Robin did nothing to improve it. He was rarely home, spending his weeks living and sleeping in a van near the school on weekends. When he returned, he stayed in another van parked in the yard. The Bain family was deeply dysfunctional. The house was untidy, filthy, and there was no attention to cleanliness. Many people described the house as a pigsty. Robin and Margaret's marriage, like their home, was falling apart. Robin maintained some contact with her children, but the relationship was not particularly close. Later, disturbing allegations would surface, suggesting that Robin had been abusive to his daughter, Laniette. For many years, David has a poor relationship with his father, Robin, but is very attached to his mother, Margaret. In 1994, at the age of 22, he was studying in the music department, aspiring to become an opera singer, although the family faced many difficulties. But all 4 children work or go to school. One of his younger sisters is studying to become a teacher, while his younger brother, Stephen, is still in school. David's education was not easy. He took a few years off from university, but eventually returned to study classical music to make ends meet. He works as a newspaper delivery boy in the morning. There were many problems in the Bain household, and parents should maintain close relationships with each other, as well as with their children. However, in the Bain family, things were different. Each person had their own life and barely communicated with each other. Over time, Margaret became convinced that their troubles stemmed from Robin, whom she believed was possessed by the devil. In her diary, she claimed Robin harbored a demon named Belle. She was so sure of this that she organized an exorcism to exorcise the demon from Robin. Robin's life became miserable. He was forced to live in a camper van and endured Margaret's accusations and rituals whenever he came home. His mental health deteriorated as time went on. He neglected basic hygiene, suffered from severe depression, and seemed to live in a mechanical manner. Colleagues described his behavior as robotic. By June of that year, the family's issues had reached a breaking point, though no one could have predicted the tragic incident that would soon unfold. On the morning of Monday, June 20, 1994, tragedy struck in the Bain household. At 7:09 a.m., David made a frantic call to emergency services and reported that they were all dead, saying he had come home to find his whole family dead. Upon investigation, authorities discovered that Margaret Arawa and Laniette were dead in their beds. Stephen was also dead, but his body showed signs of a struggle. Robin was found lying on the living room floor, also dead. David's rifle was found in the same room as Robin's body. A computer was turned on nearby, displaying the message, "Sorry, but David is the only one who deserves to live." When police arrived at the scene, they found a horrific scene. 5 people dead. At the outset of the investigation, police focused on 2 main suspects, Robin and David. Since Robin was deceased, the focus shifted toward unraveling what had truly occurred. The crime scene was staged, make investigators believe that Robin was the killer, as he was found in the living room, holding a rifle nearby. A computer displayed a suicide note believed to be from Robin, implying that he had murdered his entire family. The case, in addition to its tragic nature, is becoming increasingly noteworthy given the length of the rifle and the angle at which the bullet entered Robin's head. It was clear that he could not have harmed himself. In addition, the direction of the blood flow from the wound indicated that his head had been moved immediately after his death. This made investigators suspicious and focused their investigation on another suspect, David. The police began questioning David's actions and statements. If Robin had killed the family, why had David been spared? His account raised further doubts. He said he finished delivering newspapers at 6:40 a.m., and a neighbor confirmed seeing he return home at 6:42 a.m. However, He did not call anyone for help for the next 24 minutes, which raised many questions. When questioned by investigators, David explained that he had fainted from shock and did not know what to do. He also could not provide a reasonable explanation for the fresh wounds on his forehead and knees. In addition, the gun found next to Robin's body belonged to David, making the case even more serious. He admitted he was the only one who knew where the rifle was stored and how to access the safe where it was kept. As suspicions towards David grew, the police arrested him 4 days after the incident, charging him with the murder of his 5 family members. Digital forensics became critical to the investigation, as it was discovered that the computer used to type the note had been turned on at 6:44 a.m. based on witness testimony and David's own account. He returned home at 6:42 a.m., meaning the computer was turned on after his arrival. In the following days, new evidence emerged that proved Robin's innocence. Specifically, there was no blood found on his clothes, including the shoes and socks he was wearing that day. In addition, the rifle did not have his fingerprints. If he harms himself, his fingerprints would have been on the gun. Additionally, no traces of gunpowder were found on him, despite this mounting evidence. Just 17 days after the Bain family murders, relatives decided to burn down the house. They were concerned that teenagers might set fire to the empty house and potentially harm themselves. To prevent this, the relatives took it upon themselves to demolish the house before setting the house on fire. They invited the fire department to supervise. Within minutes, the house was engulfed in bright flames. Visible from a great distance, the smoke lingered in the area for over an hour. A legal expert questioned the legality of the action, doubting whether the legal issues regarding the ownership of the house had been fully resolved. However, David, as the heir and trustee, stated that he never wanted to see the house again. He agreed to demolish it and replace it with something else. As he considered the house to be completely worthless, the investigators could only work with the evidence they already had. Many people believed that the house burned down so quickly that it became strange and suspicious. The question is, why were the relatives allowed to destroy the crime scene? Nearly a year later, in May 1995, David's trial finally began. Prosecutors presented a detailed timeline of incident. They argued that at 5:00 a.m. on June 20, David woke up to the sound of his alarm clock. After getting dressed, he put on a pair of opera gloves, retrieved his rifle, ammunition from the closet, and used a spare key to unlock the trigger lock. He then murdered Arawa, Laniette, and Stephen. During a violent fight with Stephen, David lost a lens from his glasses and suffered multiple injuries, leaving blood at the scene. After the fight, he put his bloody clothes in the washing machine, started it, and took a shower. Then, changing into clean clothes, this left bloodstains in both the laundry room and the bathroom. After cleaning up, he followed his usual routine. He delivered newspapers and returned home at 6:42 a.m. He went upstairs, turned on his computer at 6:44 a.m., typed a message, and waited for his father, Robin, to arrive. Robin typically entered the house to pray at 7:00 a.m., and that day was no exception. David hid behind the living room curtain, waited for Robin to kneel in prayer, then attacked Robin at close range. Finally, he staged the scene to make it appear as if Robin had harmed himself. At 7:09 a.m., he called emergency services, pretending to be distraught. However, in court, David presented a completely different version of events. David claimed he woke up at his usual time, prepared the newspapers, and left the house with his dog. He said he returned home at 6:42 a.m., went to his room to take off his shoes, and then went downstairs to wash his hands and put his clothes in the washing machine. According to David, there was no blood anywhere. When he returned to his bedroom, he noticed bullets on the floor and the lock. Panicking, he searched the house and discovered Margaret, Arawa, Laniette, and Stephen murdered in their bedrooms. He found Robin dead in the living room, David claimed he then fainted for 20 minutes before calling emergency services. David's defense team argued that Robin had killed the family, then turned on the computer, left notes on computer, and ended up harming himself, however. This theory had several inconsistencies. David himself admitted he was the only one who knew where the rifle key was kept. Additionally, he could not explain the injuries he had, or explain the 20 minutes he was unconscious. The prosecution, on the other hand, claimed that he had a financial motive for committing the crime. They argued that he wanted to inherit money and knew that his parents had saved a large sum of money to buy a new house. David Bain was ultimately convicted on all 5 counts of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 16 years in the following years. The case continued to attract public attention. News of the Bain family tragedy spread rapidly across the country, sparking intense debate, and opinions are divided as to who is really responsible. One person particularly intrigued by the case was former rugby player and celebrity Joe Karam. After retiring from football, he researched and followed the case closely. He believed in David's innocence, and over the years, he visited David in prison more than 200 times. He even wrote 4 books about the case. His thorough research and persistent advocacy put enormous pressure on the judicial system, leading to a decision to appeal to the Privy Council. This appeal, which began in May 2007, came 12 years after David's initial imprisonment. The review of the case revealed significant issues. As the investigation uncovered a major error involving David, this led to the quashing of the conviction and a retrial. The Privy Council in London expressed doubts about David's conviction, especially since new evidence had emerged after the trial that had not been disclosed. For instance, one witness, Dean O'Toole, a friend of David's younger sister, Laniette, claimed that Laniette had once confided in her about experiencing incest with their father. Robin, Dean stated that after hearing this, she went home that weekend and shared the information with her family. This testimony could have shed light on Robin's motives in the case. However, at the original trial, the judge said Dean's account was just hearsay and judged her to be an unreliable witness. Therefore, this information was not presented to the jury. Additionally, other troubling details about Robin surfaced over time. For example, he shared stories of violence and cruelty written by his students on the school newsletter, including one about a family murder in 1995. The jury was not given access to this information, making it impossible for David's defense to use it effectively against Robin. Eventually, David was released on bail while awaiting the retrial. During this time, he stayed with Joe for a few months, then moving to Auckland. For David, this temporary freedom must have felt like a rare luxury, as he still had to appear in court again a year later. In March 2009, the trial resumed. David and all those involved faced the nightmare. Once again, he continued to deny the murders of his 5 family members, and his defense team again insisted that Robin was the one who murdered his family. This time, the defense had more evidence to explain why Robin killed his family. They argued that Robin suffered from severe depression, was frequently anxious when interacting with colleagues and friends, while also facing personal problems. Additionally, Laniette was about to reveal a secret about her incestuous relationship with her father, Robin. This may have affected Robin's mental state. The retrial lasted 3 months, but the jury needed less than a day to reach a unanimous verdict. David was found not guilty on all 5 counts of murder after spending 13 years in prison and another 2 years being treated as a suspect. David was acquitted and released. However, there are still skeptics who believe he is the killer. On the other hand, there are grounds for suspicion that Robin was the killer. He was very dissatisfied with his life, and if rumors of his unhealthy relationship with his daughter, Laniette, are true, that may have sent him into a state of panic. Several diaries found in Robin's truck along with disturbing testimony from his co-workers, have painted him as a troubled and unstable individual. This case remains a highly controversial subject, and there are many conflicting opinions. David sought compensation for his wrongful conviction due to the high-profile nature of the case. The New Zealand Justice Minister appointed overseas judges to assess David's claim. The review concluded that he was entitled to compensation for his losses. However, by the time the necessary documents were completed, the Justice Minister had resigned, and his successor disagreed with the terms of the compensation. However, David was eventually compensated for his wrongful imprisonment. In 2016, he received $925 to resolve the matter. During this time, he rebuilt his life. He found a job as an engineer, fell in love, got married, and had a child. He also legally changed his name. There are rumors that the family has since moved to Australia. Meanwhile, a new house has been built on the site where the Bain family home once stood before it burned down. Welcome back to our channel. Today we will explore a new case, the case of Lana Clayton. Today, we will discuss a common household medication, eye drops. What a surprise. They have indeed been used as a weapon for murder. Let's begin with the story of Stephen Clayton, a kind-hearted and romantic man who believed in true love. He found great success on his own and was passionate about helping others achieve their goals. Born in South Carolina in 1954, Stephen was a highly motivated individual. By the age of 30, he had established a successful physical therapy business focused on sports injury treatment and rehabilitation. For many years, Stephen lived his dream and achieved remarkable success, earning millions by 1995 and running a large company. After selling his business, he chose to enjoy life and dedicated his free time to teaching and mentoring young entrepreneurs, helping them realize their dreams. Throughout his life, Stephen positively influenced many people, and those he helped felt fortunate to have known him. Stephen was a firm believer in true love and made several attempts to find his soulmate. Despite his past relationships not working out, he remained hopeful of finding the one. His last marriage was to Lana Clayton in 2010. Stephen, who had moved to North Carolina, met Lana online. She was 10 years younger than he was. He quickly became infatuated with her. They got married in November 2013 when Stephen was nearly 60 years old, and Lana, his 7th or 8th wife, after 2 years of marriage. They moved into a luxurious mansion on the shores of Lake Wylie in South Carolina. Designed to resemble George Washington's estate, it was a beautiful, idyllic location surrounded by nature. Stephen had sufficient funds to support this lifestyle even after many years of retirement. Meanwhile, Lana continued to work as a medical professional with the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. Caring for veterans in various hospitals, her kindness and compassion deepened Stephen's love for her. She was exactly who he wanted by his side for several years. Stephen's family felt very close to Lana, believing that she and Stephen brought each other happiness. With no apparent signs of trouble in their relationship, little is known about what happened later in Stephen and Lana's marriage. But by 2018, Stephen had passed away on July 21. Around 1 p.m., Lana dashed out of their house into the street, stopping a passing motorcyclist in a panic. She told him her husband needed help and urged him to call 911. The man called emergency services and then saw Lana running to a neighbor's house in search of more help, while the man was speaking with the dispatcher, trying to get help to the scene. He noticed that Lana received a text message on her phone. She appeared visibly angry and did not attempt to hide her emotions. Meanwhile, the neighbor went inside the house to check on Stephen, while Lana stayed outside. It seemed that something traumatic had occurred inside. The ambulance finally arrived, and when they entered the house, they saw that Stephen was lying at the bottom of the main staircase under a white sheet, and sadly, it was too late to save him. The paramedics confirmed that Stephen had died, and everything Lana mentioned about her husband's health, along with his appearance, suggested that his death was accidental. She explained that Stephen had been feeling very dizzy and had been sick for the past few days, unable to get out of bed that morning. Although Stephen still felt unwell, when she checked on him around 11 a.m., he was alive and seemed fine later. Lana decided to go outside and mow the lawn, which took her about 2 hours due to its large size. When she returned to the house, she found Stephen lying at the foot of the stairs. Stephen had not been in good health, and given his age, this could explain his death. Looking back, several years earlier, Stephen had gone to the Bahamas to go diving. He ignored several basic safety rules, which led to him becoming severely ill. He changed from very low pressure to very high pressure too quickly, without allowing his body time to adjust, which is crucial. When diving at different depths, Stephen did not take precautions, which led to long-term complications from decompression sickness. He required several months of rehabilitation and was never able to fully recover, despite all attempts to help him. He continued to experience health issues when the police officers spoke with Lana afterward. They quickly concluded that it was a terrible accident, given Stephen's age and previous health problems. They also considered the possibility of a heart attack. However, not everyone at the scene shared this view. Nick French, one of Stephen's nephews and a police officer from a nearby county, rushed to his uncle's home as soon as he heard the news. He noticed details that others overlooked. For instance, Lana had 2 phones in the house and was a nurse. Why didn't she call 911 herself instead? She chose to run into the street to ask a stranger to call for an ambulance, and then went to a neighbor's house for help. When people are under stress, they can sometimes lose their ability to think logically, and this can happen even to those who are well trained. Additionally, Stephen's nephew noticed that the stair runner was not secured in any way. It was completely untouched. If someone, especially someone as tall as Stephen, had fallen down the stairs, the runner would have shifted, but it remained in place. There were also several odd aspects of Lana's behavior that caught Nick's attention right away. She never mentioned that. As a trained nurse, she attempted to revive her husband. The medical examiner said they would take Stephen's body and conduct several tests to determine the exact cause of death and reassure his wife, but Lana was not interested in understanding what had happened to her husband. Her primary concern was to get him to the morgue quickly. Everything about the situation seemed suspicious when someone brought up the investigation into the cause of Stephen's death. Lana appeared very uncomfortable. She started discussing how Stephen had a history of using banned substances and expressed her reluctance to perform an autopsy, fearing it would damage his reputation. However, she quickly added that he wasn't a heavy user. He smoked a little weed and maybe tried some other things occasionally. As she spoke, Lana's demeanor grew increasingly suspicious, especially when Nick suggested contacting Stephen's other nephew, Chris Fagan. Lana strongly opposed this idea, claiming she didn't want Chris to see his uncle in such a condition, believing it would be too difficult for him. However, Chris was an adult and deserved to be informed about what had happened. Nick tried 3 times to persuade Lana to tell Chris, but each time she refused. Ultimately, Nick decided that Chris needed to be informed, and so he would call Chris anyway, while an upset Lana sat on the couch speaking with police officers. Nick went upstairs to make a private call. First, he noticed that Stephen's mobile phone was missing, which was unusual since Stephen always carried it with him. He thought the phone should be lying next to Stephen's bed, on the dresser, or on the bed, but it was nowhere to be seen. Another strange thing Nick noticed was the condition of the room. Although Lana had mentioned that Stephen had been sick in bed for several days, he expected to see a typical mess: tissues, cups, and medicine packaging scattered about, along with the smell of illness. Instead, he was confronted with something entirely different. The bed was completely soaked with urine, indicating that Stephen had been left in deplorable conditions. This was alarming to Nick, especially since Lana, a nurse experienced in caring for veterans, should have ensured her husband was looked after, even if she wasn't sleeping in the same room as him. She could have at least changed the sheets. Investigators believe that Lana intentionally discarded Stephen's phone while he was in bed, preventing him from calling for help. They also think she may have taken his phone several days before his death, since his sister was unable to reach him, which was unusual for him. Chris, Stephen's nephew, whom Lana had wanted to avoid contacting, was eventually informed about the situation. He decided to visit her to see how she was doing and to discuss matters in person. And upon his arrival, he brought up the topic of the will. As the heir to Stephen estate, Chris wanted to locate the will so he could handle his uncle's affairs. However, Lana claimed that Stephen had not created a will. Chris knew this couldn't be true because he had seen the will before. Furthermore, it was hard to believe that Stephen, who was wealthy, intelligent, and 64 years old with health issues, would not have prepared one. The main surprise came when the Clayton family learned that Lana had destroyed Stephen's will. She had started a small fire and burned a stack of legal documents. Lana believed that by doing this, as Stephen's wife, she would automatically inherit his entire estate under South Carolina law, but her actions went further. 2 weeks after Stephen's passing, during his wake, family and friends noticed that Lana had already collected all of his belongings and was trying to give them away at his funeral. She offered his items to relatives, stating that anything they didn't take would be given to outsiders. This behavior raised eyebrows and didn't match what one would expect from a grieving widow. Stephen's nephews were determined not to let their doubts about Lana be ignored. They discreetly contacted the morgue, requested an autopsy and toxicology tests on behalf of the family. All without informing Lana, the forensic toxicologist and medical examiner conducted tests that revealed the true cause of Stephen's death. They discovered that Stephen Clayton had an extremely high level of a chemical commonly found in some eye drops, particularly those used to treat redness. This chemical is designed to constrict blood vessels in the eyes when applied, but when ingested in large amounts, it can depress the central nervous system, cause rapid heart rate, and even result in death, since this substance is colorless, odorless, and tasteless. It can be consumed unknowingly, making it very dangerous. Even at lower doses, it can cause unpleasant side effects like vomiting and diarrhea, while higher doses can lead to life-threatening situations. With this new information in mind, investigators needed to determine whether Stephen had ingested the eye drops. Therefore, on August 29, 2018, Lana was called in for questioning under the pretext of clarifying some details. At that time, she thought she had avoided suspicion. In reality, the detectives wanted to share their findings and observe her reaction, although Lana was aware that an autopsy had been performed without her knowledge. She was unaware that FBI agents and personnel from the York County Sheriff's Office were in the next room, listening to her During the interrogation, Lana initially acted like a grieving widow who had no idea what had happened to her husband, however. When the detectives began discussing the eye drops, she quickly realized their significance, and her behavior shifted dramatically. She seemed to know about the substance and started to weave a complicated story about Stephen. She claimed that her husband had discovered that adding a few drops of the medication to his morning coffee could act as a laxative, which he had been doing due to his bowel issues. This was her explanation for why the substance was found in Stephen's body. There were many other products available that could address this issue. Lana herself was a nurse, and the detectives couldn't understand why Stephen had been doing this for some time. However, Lana soon sensed that they doubted her initial account. So she changed her story. She suddenly began to assert that Stephen had abused her for years. She attempted to persuade the detectives that her husband was a terrible and cruel person who had used illegal substances. The detectives quickly recognized that her claims were false, as they had already reviewed the toxicology report. If Stephen had been using banned substances regularly, it would have been evident in the report. They also looked into her accusations of his cruelty and found no evidence to support them. Ultimately, Lana began to realize she was in a precarious situation. The interrogation concluded with her returning home. Unaware that the investigators were closely monitoring her, apparently, she thought a lot while driving home, because when Lana got home, she sat down with the detectives and told them almost everything. Lana disclosed that after enduring years of abuse from her husband, she finally reached a breaking point. She admitted to pouring an entire bottle of eye drops into his water, claiming she did not intend to kill him, but wanted him to suffer. Her goal was to make him ill for a day or two, so he wouldn't bother her, giving her a chance to escape his constant demands in a shocking twist. Lana also confessed that 2 years prior to Stephen's death, she had called 911, claiming she accidentally shot him in the back of the head with a crossbow. She explained that she was just loading the crossbow for protection and accidentally shot him while he was sleeping. Surprisingly, the police believed her story of an accident, and Stephen likely supported her claim, thinking his wife would never intentionally harm him. However, on August 29, 2018, Lana confessed that Stephen's death was not an accident and that she had intentionally killed him to stop him from abusing her. The investigators still believed there was more to the story. The circumstances of the crime scene in Stephen's bedroom led detectives to a specific conclusion. It was evident that Lana had been gradually poisoning him over several days to determine how long it would take to kill him. Specifically, while he spent 3 days in bed feeling dizzy, she was experimenting with the right dosage of poison, and on the 3rd day, she succeeded. Additionally, regarding Stephen's missing mobile phone, detectives suspected that Lana had thrown it into Lake Wylie to prevent him from calling for help when he was unable to move in bed. York County Police arrested Lana Clayton after a thorough investigation based on her confession, which took several days to evaluate. During this time, Lana attempted to harm herself by taking pills and turning on the gas in her home. Fortunately, a neighbor checked on her and discovered the situation. She was quickly taken to the hospital and survived. A few days later, she was officially arrested and charged with murder once it became clear that Lana had killed Stephen. His family began to reflect on the past few years of his marriage. Questioning whether Lana had been planning the murder for a long time, they speculated that their move to South Carolina was deliberate. Considering that state law stipulates a spouse inherits everything if their partner dies without a will, they also remembered that Stephen had experienced unexplained health issues intermittently over several months, and even the best doctors could not help him. On January 17, 2020, Lana pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter and tampering with food and drugs. She maintains that she did not intend to kill her husband. The prosecutor described the case as one of the worst in York County's history, according to the prosecution. Lana administered eye drops to Stephen over several days at their home on Lake Wylie and ignored him as he was dying, even throwing his phone into the lake to prevent him from calling for help. Authorities suggest her motive was financial, and she even burned a will. Lana's lawyer argued that she had been a victim of lifelong abuse and suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder, which developed during her marriage to Stephen after a jury deliberated. Lana was sentenced to 25 years in prison without parole. This was a well-thought-out and successfully executed plan on Lana's part. Stephen's relatives confronted the deception of the evil murderer, whom they believed to be not only a good person, but also their friend. Lana deceived not only Stephen, but also his family and friends. The case of Alexandra Duxay. Alexandra Duxay, a talented and ambitious young woman, was once the pride of her family and friends with a promising career in the entertainment industry. With her radiant appearance, intelligence, and burning passion, Alexandra appeared in many television shows and relentlessly pursued her big dream. But everything suddenly stopped one day in May 2006, when she was found brutally murdered in the basement of her family's home in Milford, Connecticut. Alexandra's tragic death not only shocked the community, but also opened a years-long investigation, revealing haunting hidden corners of the person who took her life. Alexandra was born on December 9, 1979, in New Haven, Connecticut, USA. Her relatives called her Sandra. She grew up on the coast, just an hour outside of New York. In the Milford area, Alexandra's parents were named John and Linda. The girl's parents met in 1974 in Connecticut, and a few months later, they got married. Alexandra had two older brothers. Despite the age difference, they were very close. The brothers looked after their younger sister and helped their parents. They all played sports together and spent most of their time playing games. They lived in a big house, and Alexandra used the basement as her room. Later, she equipped it not only as a bedroom, but also as a gym, where she invited friends over for overnight stays and socializing. Alexandra was engaged in dancing and gymnastics in high school. She had a dream of becoming an actress, which quite corresponded with her ambitious and active character. She had been dancing throughout her childhood, and in her youth, she began to take part in various competitions, earning awards along the way. She had a very busy schedule. In addition to dancing, Alexandra continued her studies to get a degree in law. After receiving her secondary education, she entered college. Alexandra completed dance courses and then got a part-time job at a bank. While working there, she met her first love, a guy named Matthew Pugh. Both loved sports and worked hard. Alexandra was able to obtain a bachelor's degree in finance and became a systems analyst at the same bank where she had worked for several years prior. She dedicated almost 10 years to this business, and in parallel, she received a license as a real estate agent. At the age of 23, Alexandra also became an assistant teacher at the dance academy. Career successes accompanied her, and later, Alexandra performed a lot in New York, dancing at events and even starring in music videos. At 26, she began working with a producer from Atlanta to create demo versions of videos for music albums. Her dreams began to materialize. An agent in New York who helped her pass auditions, and as a result, she landed supporting roles in a popular TV series for Alexandra. It was a significant milestone, despite the secondary role. She believed it was only a stepping stone to greater success, given the scale of her activities. She had practically no time for a personal life, despite having dated her boyfriend for years. By January 2004, they decided to break up. Alexandra chose to fully concentrate on work and dancing. This decision coincided with a difficult time for her family. Her parents also decided to separate. Her father returned to Florida to be closer to his elderly mother. By this time, Alexandra's brothers had moved away and were living with their own families, leaving her effectively alone with her mother. Despite most of the house being vacated, she continued to live in the basement, which she had equipped for her own purposes. It contained training equipment as well as a whole stand filled with dance awards. Alexandra lived in the basement with her big dog, and her busy life did not prevent her from attending acting auditions. She had new prospects in cinema during this period and also became interested in charity work. She collected items and toys for children from low-income families and later planned to organize a free canteen for those in need with like-minded individuals. However, the situation changed dramatically. On May 19, 2006, Alexandra met her best friend, Nicole, with whom she worked out at the gym. They trained together from 10.15 to 11.15, after which her friend left. Nicole wanted to stay longer at the gym, while Alexandra planned to go home for lunch and to get ready for her evening plans. Around 4 p.m., Nicole called Alexandra, but the call went straight to voicemail. This was unusual, as Alexandra was usually very responsive due to her work requiring frequent phone communication. By 4:03 p.m., Alexandra still had not replied. Meanwhile, Linda, Alexandra's mother, arrived home and noticed the front door was wide open. Alexandra's favorite dog was outside in the courtyard, and her daughter's white Mitsubishi was parked in the driveway. This was odd because the doors were usually closed, and the dog never went outside without a collar and leash. The dog sat outside, wagging its tail, which added to Linda's concern. She was in a panic, trying to understand what had happened. So she entered the house screaming. As Linda moved through the house, her anxiety grew. She went to the basement stairs and noticed large drops of dark red liquids on the floor. When she reached the bottom, she saw another large dark red liquid stain. To her horror, she found Alexandra lying on her back, unresponsive. With a massive pool of red liquid beneath her, Alexandra had a severe head injury and was lying in an unnatural position under a table. The mother initially thought her daughter might have fallen down the stairs and hit her head on the radiator, which had a visible blood stain. Linda rushed to her daughter to check for a pulse, but found none. She could barely regain her composure and managed to call 911 in a state of panic. She screamed into the phone. Trying to describe the horrific scene before her, the dispatcher struggled to understand her, as her words were often interrupted by sobs and incoherent mumbling. Eventually, the dispatcher understood that Linda's daughter was lying on the basement floor and showed no signs of life. When several police officers arrived, Linda met them outside. The sight they encountered in the basement was one of the most disturbing they had ever seen. In here, there are traces of a terrible attack, and Alexandra's face was seriously injured. A piece of the knife was found embedded in her skull. The broken handle lay nearby. It was clear that Alexandra had been attacked with a kitchen knife, with such force that the handle had snapped off. Alexandra received blunt force trauma to the face, and her mother discovered that one of Alexandra's trophies was missing. Investigators believe the perpetrator used the trophy to seriously injure Alexandra's face. The police quickly concluded that Alexandra was a murder victim, along with the brutal injuries and the apparent murder weapon. Investigators found a shoe print in the blood. This shoe print lacked a typical tread pattern. Additionally, small traces of blood were found in other areas of the house, including the bathroom on the toilet seat and sink, presumably where the attacker was trying to wash his hands. Moreover, investigators noticed signs of an attempt to clean the red streaks in certain spots around the home. This led law enforcement to suspect that there was a personal motive behind the crime, possibly related to the missing trophy. given the violent nature of the attack. They believed the culprit was likely someone known to Alexandra. While most furniture and belongings in the apartment were untouched, nearly all the clothes had been removed from the closet, and valuables like jewelry and money were left behind. It appeared the assailant was searching for something specific, which resulted in items being strewn across the bed and floor. The police reported that Alexandra was attacked when she went to the basement. She was pushed down the stairs, suffering her first injury when she hit her head on the radiator. She did not die immediately. As there were clear signs of a struggle, detectives quickly determined that the knife used in the attack had been brought from outside. Since none of the kitchen utensils from the house were missing, investigators accessed a mobile phone belonging to the victim and discovered over 100 phone numbers she was familiar with, all of which needed to be thoroughly examined. During the investigation of the crime scene, another notable detail emerged. A garbage bag had been removed from the trash can. This suggested that the attacker had disposed of it to avoid leaving crucial evidence for the investigators. They is believed that he might have changed his clothes, using the large garbage bag to dispose of blood-stained items around 5 p.m. Alexandra's brother and her friend Nicole arrived at the scene. Nicole was in a state of hysteria because, having seen Alexandra alive a few hours earlier, the quiet Milford area where Alexandra lives is filled with people close to her, including Linda and Nicole. The local community was anxious to know what had happened, but the police refused to provide any comments until they clarified the circumstances of the crime. The house was cordoned off. A friend mentioned that after her workout, Alexandra had planned to get ready for a date with a new guy, whom she intended to meet at a restaurant. Nicole identified the guy as Jason Malone, but she did not know any other details, which making him a person of interest for the police. Detectives and family members of Alexandra were canvassing the area and interviewing residents in Milford, a place known for its low crime rate. This incident shocked the community. Alexandra was a celebrity known for her minor roles in the TV series Law and Order. Now, she herself has become the face of crime reporting. The seriousness of the situation brought national media attention. The police reached out to the media to seek potential witnesses, prompting local journalists to actively search for information. However, neighbors provided conflicting accounts. One man reported seeing a red pickup truck near the scene around 12:03 p.m. that he believed did not belong to anyone in the area. Another neighbor claimed to have seen a black man walking past the victim's house around 4 p.m., who then got into a dark green Honda Accord. Unfortunately, none of the witnesses took photos or remembered the license plate numbers. Meanwhile, detectives were trying to learn more about Jason, who out to be Alexandra's new boyfriend, although they couldn't reach him directly. His sister answered the police's calls and provided information about him, allowing them to invite him to the police station for questioning. When Jason arrived, he appeared nervous, but firmly stated that he had no involvement in the murder. He confirmed that he was Alexandra's new boyfriend, explaining that they met when he visited the bank with a friend. He was shy and told his friend that he found her very attractive. Jason asked his friend to get Alexandra's phone number for him, which she agreed. That evening, she called Jason. They arranged to meet and chat, eventually planning their first date. Jason was a few years older than Alexandra at the time of their meeting. He lived with his mother, having moved out from his ex-girlfriend, with whom he had broken up. Jason was experiencing a tough time, as his relationship with his ex sometimes rekindled and then fell apart again. He worked for an energy company, where he checked electric meters in homes throughout the city. Meanwhile, Alexandra was in no hurry to announce them as a couple. After a 6-year relationship with her ex, she wanted to take a closer look at her new boyfriend and make no statements about him. At the station, Jason reported that he called Alexandra around noon. They had a calm conversation and made plans for the evening, intending to have dinner together. During their phone call, Alexandra suddenly asked him to hold on because she saw her ex-boyfriend outside her house. Jason then heard the door open, and Alexandra asked, "What are you doing here?" but received no response after the door closed. She picked up her phone again and told Jason she couldn't talk at that moment. Jason suspected that she let someone into her house and then didn't call him back, which made him feel suspicious and a bit jealous. 15 minutes later, when she still hadn't called back, he started to worry. Fortunately, she answered his call at 12:35. They spoke for a few more minutes, but Alexandra didn't mention who had visited her or why. Jason's account helped narrow down the time frame of when Alexandra died, according to Jason. During this period, he was busy with work, driving around the city and checking equipment. After 3 p.m., he went to a clothing store to choose new pants for their date around 4:3. He tried calling her again, but she didn't answer. Later, when he went to her house, he noticed police cars nearby. The police talked to the victim's relatives and found out that Alexandra's only ex-boyfriend was Matthew. However, they had broken up 2 years, while detectives were working on obtaining a warrant to examine mobile phones. They spoke with Alexandra's relatives. They learned that her breakup with her ex-boyfriend was not smooth. Linda was aware that Matthew had a criminal record and had treated Alexandra poorly. Their relationship lasted until Matthew was first imprisoned in 1998. During his time in prison, Alexandra supported and visited him, but he ended up serving a long sentence despite Alexandra's love for him. Doubts about their relationship grew. By January 2004, they officially ended their relationship, partly due to Matthew's increasingly rude and threatening behavior. Although they still communicated, his aggression continued to rise. So was no chance of rekindling their relationship. At this time, Matthew was found living with his wife about 30 minutes from the home of Alexandra on the day the police arrived. He was working at a Papa John's restaurant. The conversation with the police took place right there on the 15th. He mentioned that he had 2 jobs, the second being with a company that manufactures aircraft parts. Located about an hour north of Milford, he claimed he was working from 6:3 a.m. to 3 p.m. on the day of the murder and left home only after learning that Alexandra had died. The police noticed he appeared somewhat confused during the conversation. Matthew appeared to distrust the police, but he did admit that he had spoken to Alexandra on the phone a few days before her death. Their last in-person meeting, however, had occurred at least 4 weeks prior to the tragic event. After this conversation, the detectives left the following day. Matthew returned to the police station and confessed that he had lied during their previous discussion. He clarified that he actually arrived at work at 6:3 a.m., but at 9:15 a.m. he requested time off and left. He spent most of the day at home and went into town to care for a sick relative. Matthew insisted that he was neither in Milford nor close to the suburbs that day. He agreed to take a DNA test and provided the police with the clothes he wore on the day of his ex-girlfriend's death. The investigation continued, and both he and Jason remained the main suspects in the murder. Forensic experts determined that Alexandra had died from multiple stab wounds, cuts, and blunt force trauma. Primarily to her face, the attack was so brutal that she had swallowed several of her own knocked-out teeth before dying. The expert discovered a crucial piece of evidence. A hair found stuck to the dried blood on Alexandra's body did not belong to her. Additional pieces of duct tape were found on her face. Apparently, it was used to tape her mouth during the massacre. Investigators looked into Jason's background and found that he had a criminal record. Having served over 5 years for banned substance trafficking, he also drove a car that matched the description given by a neighbor of one of the victims. Another witness reported seeing this dark green car parked near Alexandra's house throughout the day. Despite this, Jason maintained his innocence, arguing that the car model he drove was very common in the city at that time. However, detectives could verify not his alibi of being at a clothing store to buy pants around 3 p.m. He had indeed visited the store, but much later in the evening, which contradicted his statement. Maybe he was trying to mislead the investigation. However, by checking the geolocation data from his phone calls. Investigators found that although his phone was active throughout the day, it never registered in the Milford area consequently. The police ruled him out as a suspect. It was now Matthew's turn to be questioned. The police spoke with Alexandra's mother to gather more information about him. She had never liked Matthew. He was 7 years older than Alexandra and had a criminal record. Unlike Alexandra, he showed no interest in personal growth or work. The detectives then contacted his employer, who confirmed that he had left work much earlier than he had claimed. Instead of finishing at 9:15 a.m., he actually left at 8:39 a.m. He had also been at a gas station at 2:1 p.m., not at noon, as he had told the police. The discrepancies in his words were alarming. While he spent time at car dealerships until 4 p.m., the times he provided were incorrect. The investigators suspected that Matthew might be the murderer. On May 26, they obtained a search warrant for his house. Inside, everything was tidy and clean, with nothing suspicious found except for some fine art. It was assumed that the remains of this roll could have been found on the victim's face. However, this did not indicate involvement in the murder. Since many people have electrical tape in their homes, all other tests and analyses failed to link Matthew to the crime. A thorough search of his property yielded no results. Leaving the investigation at a standstill, the only remaining action for the police was to send the electrical tape they had found for lab analysis. This type of tape was quite specific and difficult to find. It was not available in regular stores or online. In 2006, only 3 nearby companies used it, one of which was an aircraft parts plant where Matthew works. The electrical tape found on Alexandra's face had the same adhesive base, which could indicate the real killer. The police decided to contact Matthew's relatives again, and they uncovered important information. Matthew's brother revealed that he had a fierce temper and a potential motive against Alexandra. They discovered that, in 2002, he had given Alexandra his Nissan car and later lent her $2. She broke up with him in January 2004 while he was in prison, and she refused to return anything. It made him very angry. On June 14, detectives re-interrogated the suspect, highlighting the inconsistencies in his story. But Matthew managed to explain each of the disputed points, leaving the police with no new evidence. It wasn't until the end of the year that the DNA test results were available. The tests revealed that all the blood in the basement belonged solely to Alexandra. The blood droplets found in the bathroom were more special, as they belonged to her and a man. However, the concentration was too low to extract precise DNA profiles based on the results of the examination. Experts were able to establish that the killer was a black man. The hair found on Alexandra's hand could not be identified, and none of the fingerprints collected at the crime scene matched the suspects. Additionally, the specific shoe print could not be traced. Consequently, the investigation reached another standstill. A reward of $50 was offered for any information that could help advance the case. In 2010, authorities decided to reach out to prisoners. A photo of Alexandra was shared with correctional facilities. In September 2011, a prisoner named Paula contacted the Milford Police Department. She revealed that her former cellmate, Christopher Richards, had been in a relationship with Alexandra for 2 years before her death. Paula noted that they were together during the time between Alexandra's breakup with Matthew and the start of her relationship with Jason. Surprisingly, this relationship was unknown to others. When Alexandra informed Christopher's about their breakup, he was in prison. He became very angry and told his cellmate that he wanted to kill her. Once he was released, an investigation was launched to look into the situation, and it was discovered that the person who contacted the police had lied. Christopher did not know Alexandra, and there had been no communication between them, which would be unusual in a 2-year relationship. It seemed likely that this prisoner was trying to frame his cellmate. 2 weeks later, a bus driver named Jeremy, who had been friends with Alexandra for a long time, came forward with information. He reported that he had witnessed Alexandra receiving a threatening text from a man named Donovan. Donovan demanded repayment of money that Alexandra had lent him and threatened to kill her if she did not pay him back. Jeremy stated that this occurred just 2 weeks before her death, however. It appeared that Alexandra did not take these threats seriously. Ultimately, this claim was also found to be false 6 years later. In August 2012, detectives finally received crucial information. Anthony Pugh, Matthew's cousin, reached out to the police station. He revealed details about a gifted car and the $2 that Alexandra had borrowed from her brother. His long story began back in 1993, when Matthew involved him in a criminal scheme. Both were later imprisoned for their actions and, after being released in 2005 and 2006, they found jobs at the same plant, although they maintained a good relationship. A year later, Matthew betrayed Anthony, leading to Anthony's imprisonment. So, Anthony decided to take revenge by sharing the truth. Anthony disclosed that when Matthew broke up with Alexandra, he became obsessed with her and even considered killing her. Matthew planned to inject her with a lethal dose of drugs to make it look like an accidental overdose, however. Upon learning about her new relationship, he changed his mind and opted for a more violent method of murder. The brothers worked at the same aircraft factory where Matthew stole gloves and special tape to commit a crime. Police believe he wanted to profit from this information, and he later admitted it directly. Anthony sought not only $50, but also sought revenge on his brother. When the information was verified, it was found that during the initial data analysis, the police overlooked that Matthew was indeed in the area near Milford at around 11.47, but left at 12.07. He returned and stayed at the scene for over an hour. Ultimately, the police had strong grounds to arrest Matthew and file charges against him. On August 24, 2012, Matthew Pugh was charged with first-degree murder and home invasion. However, at that time, he was already in prison for assaulting a woman in 2008. He threatened the victim with a weapon and stole her purse when she tried to resist. He's attacked her in the arm. The prosecutor's office found out that the problems with Matthew began after Alexandra wrote to the prison that she wanted to break up, according to cellmates. He was obsessed with her. In response, he wrote an 8-page letter over a couple of months, of course. He was angry because of these events, but after leaving prison, he did not show any aggression towards his ex. He started a relationship and even had a child. But at the same time, Matthew, all this time, hatched a plan. 3 years later, in February 2015, Matthew appeared in court. The prosecution claimed that the guy committed a deliberate massacre on the basis of jealousy. The lawyer insisted that the client was not involved in the murder because there was no direct evidence in the form of DNA and fingerprints at the crime scene. The situation for Matthew became completely stalemate when he began to answer the prosecution's questions. He desperately tried to prove his innocence, but it all didn't seem very plausible. Besides, his brother was testifying against him. The jury went to pass sentence. It was really not easy. In this complicated story, there were many blank spots, and many considered the accused a pathological liar. It was even necessary to ask the court to repeat Matthew's story. Only 3 days later, the jury found him guilty of first-degree murder and trespassing. He was sentenced to 60 years in prison for murder and another 20 for trespassing. The Alexandra Duxie case is a heartbreaking and complex one that leaves many unanswered questions, from the tangled relationships between Alexandra and those around her to the doubts about who took her life. The case remains one of the most controversial and haunting in Milford, Connecticut. Although the killer, Matthew Pugh, has been convicted, stories of motives, complicated relationships, and unclear details continue to haunt the public. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Christine Belford. On the morning of February 11, 2013, an unknown man opened fire as he approached the victims near the entrance to the courthouse. killing 2 women. The local patrol received a radio message about the shooting, urging all available police to rush to the scene. When they arrived, the officers found 2 bodies on the floor near the entrance, covered with a sheet to shield the victims from public view. The police took over the case, and soon, a thorough investigation was underway to piece together the chain of events. Teams were assembled to search the courthouse and the surrounding area. This is where the police discovered their first clues. They believe the attacker is closely related to Christine Belford, who had been threatened for many years. On September 9, 2007, at approximately 9 p.m., 6 years before the murders, a police officer received a call from a woman. She reported that her 3 daughters had been kidnapped and alleged that her ex-husband, David Matusiewicz, the father of the children, was involved. Christine Belford was the one who contacted the police. She was concerned that her ex-husband's mother, Lenore Matusiewicz, was involved. Christine informed the police that on August 26, 2007, David, along with his mother, had picked up their 3 daughters to take them to Disneyland in Orlando, Florida. Although Christine and David were divorced, he had joint custody of the children. He had never been violent or shown any serious problems in the past, so Christine felt comfortable letting him take the children. They left in their trailer for the trip, but weeks passed without any contact from David. He had completely disappeared and never returned the children to her. He also ignored her calls, which worried her greatly. The police tried to reassure Christine, saying that the children would return after spending time with their father. However, they also considered the possibility that something had delayed their trip. The police attempted to contact David, but were unable to because his phone was disconnected. They then looked into David's background and family and discovered that he owned a medical optics clinic, where he had met Christine when she was hired. Christine had been married before and had a daughter, Catherine, from a previous marriage. However, this did not stop Christine from developing a relationship with David. David quickly fell in love with Christine, and they began dating. Their relationship progressed rapidly, and it seemed like they were headed for marriage. However, David was hesitant to introduce Christine to his family because he was worried about how they would react to her past, especially the fact that she had a daughter from a previous relationship. He was concerned that his strict parents would not accept her. It was not until their wedding in 2001 that he introduced Christine to his parents, and surprisingly, the meeting went well. After their marriage, the couple bought a house in Middleton, New Jersey, and later welcomed 3 daughters. However, everyday challenges began to strain their relationship, leading to frequent arguments. David thought that moving away might help, so they relocated to Wilmington, Delaware, where his parents offered to support them. Unfortunately, this change did not improve their situation. In fact, it only made things worse. Christine felt that David was unhelpful and did not support her in caring for their children and managing household chores. His parents were difficult, often rude to her, and they attempted to control her within the household. Overwhelmed by the situation, Christine decided to file for divorce in 2006, which led to a tense custody battle. David claimed that Christine was a bad mother and had mental health problems. However, her friends and family disagreed. The judge ordered a psychiatric evaluation, which found that Christine was mentally stable. In contrast, the evaluation identified several mental health issues for David, who was stressed and depressed, occasionally lost touch with reality, and struggled to control his anger. Ultimately, custody was awarded to Christine, while David was granted visitation rights on weekends and holidays. Christine is now responsible for raising their 4 daughters, and David has moved in with his parents. David comes from a close-knit family. His father, a weapons collector, was previously a police officer, but was fired after 4 years for misconduct. He later worked at the post office and drove a bus. David's mother, Lenore, works at a nursing home. At first glance, their family seems close-knit and normal. However, Christine told the police that David's family was obsessed with children and posed a danger to her daughters. She pleaded with the police to intervene for the safety of her children. Some people also voiced suspicions that the family was not normal. It became clear that David's parents were actually selfish, controlling, and aggressive. When the court decided that the children should live with Christine, Lenore became angry and began manipulating her son to pursue a custody battle, employing unethical tactics without hesitation. The police grew suspicious, particularly when Christine went to the police station to present custody papers. Although Christine had been granted custody rights, David and his family were determined to prove that she was unfit as a mother. David continued to seek full custody using dishonest tactics. This alarmed the police, whom Christine contacted. She informed them that David was accusing her of mental illness and requested a further evaluation. This was just the beginning of a series of lies. The police checked David's credit card transactions to locate him and discovered that the last payment was made on August 26, the day David left the house with the children. He had wisely chosen not to use the card afterward to avoid being tracked. Given these circumstances, the police had to classify the case as a kidnapping, which prompted the mobilization of the entire local police force to track the movements of David and the children. The police carefully recorded his phone number and car details. However, they did not realize that this was just the beginning of a multi-year investigation in American crime history. More than 3,000 kilometers south of Christine's residence in Hidalgo, Texas, her children were in a car with their father. The children that Christine and the entire city police force were desperately trying to find. David was driving with his mother in the passenger seat. They drove along a regular highway until they turned and headed toward the Mexican border. About a kilometer from the end of U.S. jurisdiction, the fugitives' car stopped at a checkpoint. The officer took their passports, asked how many people were in the car, and noticed children playing in the trailer, laughing and having fun. As everything seemed normal, the officer had no reason to be suspicious. He checked the papers, returned them to David, and allowed the car to pass without issue. David and Lenore had prepared fake passports for everyone, including their 3 children, enabling them to leave the United States without any problems. They had planned the kidnapping of the children a year in advance. First, the police went to David's house and searched it. They found no one inside. Both David and his mother, Lenore, were missing. In the fireplace, they discovered burned documents, including a marriage contract with Christine, divorce papers, and bank statements from New Zealand and Canada. Investigations revealed that shortly before their disappearance, Lenore had bought a trailer for $82,000. In addition, David had sold his business for just $650. He then took out a $250,000 loan in Christine's name, and the way he did this astounded the police. Now, the fugitives, along with their 3 children, could be anywhere in the world. The investigation into the kidnapping dragged on for months without any clues. During this time, there was no contact from David or the children, as if they had completely disappeared. Meanwhile, David's father and his sister, Amy Gonzalez, claimed during police questioning that they had no knowledge of David and Lenore's plans. However, police found their testimony unconvincing due to numerous inconsistencies. Furthermore, shortly after the children were kidnapped, David's family bought a house and moved to Ed Couch, Texas, about 30 kilometers from the Mexican border. David's family also transferred large sums of money between their accounts, raising suspicions that David and the children may have fled there. Police wondered if David's father and sister had been in contact with him and Lenore. They believed that David's entire family might have been involved in the case, but this theory needed to be thoroughly investigated and proven. The search for the missing girls went international as U.S. authorities sought assistance from the police in Mexico. The media reported extensively on the kidnapping of the 3 girls. The FBI soon received information that David had bought a house and was hiding in a small town in Mexico. A police team was quickly formed to arrest him, but when they arrived, he was gone. It seemed that he had been alerted to the police presence and had fled. However, The FBI had obtained a fake passport for David, indicating that he had moved to Costa Rica. At this point, the investigation hit another roadblock, as they were unable to find him for the next 16 months. Leads to David, Lenore, and the 3 children had completely dried up. Christine was devastated by not knowing the fate of her children, and it is hard to imagine the extent of her suffering during this time. Christy began to struggle with depression due to the stress, and her condition worsened, but she was determined not to give up. During this time, the FBI received a new lead. They intercepted calls from David's sister Amy's cell phone, which led them to a short call to South America, specifically to a town called Catarina in Nicaragua. The local police were notified, and all checkpoints along the way were alerted. A search for David, Lenore, and the 3 children began. It was discovered that they were living somewhere in the woods. They were using a trailer with Delaware state plates. The challenge arose because this type of trailer is very common in Nicaragua, making it difficult to locate the specific vehicle. As a result, the search process was significantly delayed. The entire police force was urgently working to locate the missing children, as their safety was at stake. For 2 years, there was no information about the 3 girls. On March 13, 2009, a police officer in Nicaragua stopped a car during a routine inspection. The officer was aware of the ongoing search and knew that a suspect was using a similar trailer. He noticed that the people in the car resembled those the police were looking for. A man named David was driving, with his adult daughter in the passenger seat. When the officer asked David to get out of the car, he produced a fake driver's license. Despite David's protests, the officer insisted that he get out of the car, resulting in David's arrest. That same night, Christine boarded a plane to Nicaragua. After 2 years of separation, she finally had the chance to see her daughters. However, her children had no idea how much they were wanted. At the time of the kidnapping, they were too young to understand what was happening. Their father, David, convinced them that Christine had abandoned them and never loved them. This was only the beginning of the lies and cruelty that Christine faced. After his arrest, David was charged with kidnapping and fraud. He eventually pleaded guilty to these charges and was sentenced to 2 years in prison, followed by 5 years of probation. His mother, Lenora, also pleaded guilty to aiding and abetting and was sentenced to 18 months in prison. The return of the 3 girls to their mother was widely reported by the local media. Christine noted that the girls were thin, gaunt, and frightened, and they all had dental problems. During their time away from home, they suffered from untreated autism. All 3 girls were plagued by nightmares and required rehabilitation and psychological support. Outraged by their condition, Christine took action to revoke David's parental rights to prevent future abductions. She also filed a lawsuit for emotional distress on behalf of her daughters, intending to use the money to rehabilitate them after their traumatic experience in the woods. The public supported her. Christine, overwhelmed by the pain she faced, was unable to work. As the situation escalated, Christine's ex-husband, David, was furious at losing parental rights and not being able to see his children. Due to a new lawsuit, he also ran out of money to hire a lawyer. He refused to pay Christine any money and declared bankruptcy. As a result, Christine withdrew the lawsuit, realizing that she would not be able to get any money from him for her children's medical treatment. She asked David and his family to leave her and her children alone. Although David and his family agreed to her request, they had no intention of doing so. Soon, David began plotting his revenge. On December 22, 2009, he sent a letter from prison to his sister Amy, stating that he had stopped pretending to be a good person. While Christine's children were recovering during their father's imprisonment, they began rehabilitation and received dental care. During this time, a woman named Cindy contacted Christine through social media. She inquired about the family's health and mentioned that she had met David, which helped them bond over their shared experiences with him. They quickly formed a strong friendship and kept in touch. Christine shared important updates about her daughters, including their academic achievements, sports activities, and the names of their schools. They even exchanged photos. Cindy expressed her support, which seemed genuine, as Christine's story had garnered national attention, and she received much support after David's sentencing. Recently, alarming allegations began circulating online on a website. Lenora posted a detailed list of allegations claiming that Christine had abused her eldest daughter, bullied her, and imposed moral oppression on the child. It was reported that the children lived in appalling conditions, were forced to fight a dog for food, and were made to eat on dirty floors. There were also allegations that Christine intended to sell her daughters for $50,000 each. Many people who knew Christine were shocked, as she was considered the epitome of a good mother. Fortunately, only a few took the news seriously. Most believed that someone was trying to discredit Christine and that she would never allow such a thing to happen to her children. Christine realized that David and his family were trying to sabotage her in order to take away her parental rights. If successful, his relatives could gain custody of the children, allowing him to stay in touch with them. David was so obsessed with his plan to gain custody that he was constantly looking for ways to get revenge on his ex-wife, Christine. However, Christine could not understand how he could have orchestrated this from prison, where he had no access to the internet. The explanation was simple. One of his family members had supported him. It was eventually revealed that his mother, Lenora, and sister Amy were the ones who helped him. From there, the online bullying and terror against Christine, an innocent mother, began. In a letter from David, who was in prison, to his sister Amy, he gave specific instructions on how to spread damaging stories about Christine. He used encryption to avoid detection. It was Amy who initiated the anonymous emails to Christine's friends, neighbors, and acquaintances. She even shared false information with the school that Christine's daughters attended, intentionally damaging Christine's reputation. These lies also spread to the church that Christine attended on Sundays. The rumors affected her and caused her great distress, forcing Christine to leave the Sunday school where she worked. Christine taught the Bible to elementary school children, but she was worried that the online rumors and her presence could endanger the children. Her ex-husband's family tried to portray her as a threat to the children. Meanwhile, Christine did her best to protect her young daughters from the chaos. At the time, her eldest daughter from her first marriage, Catherine, was 16 years old. She stood by her mother and sisters, vehemently denying all allegations of harassment and abuse. As time passed since David and Lenore's mother-in-law were incarcerated, Christine began to feel increasingly uneasy. On September 16, 2010, Lenore Matusiewicz was released, leaving Christine even more afraid of the woman. She relied on a court order prohibiting David's family from coming near her children or her property, but she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. She confided her worries to only a few close friends, including her pen pal Cindy, who supported her. On March 20, 2011, Christine's friend sent her a disturbing video. In it, a woman is seen watching Christine and her children from a car parked near their home. The woman had been spotted watching Christine's family home on several occasions. A video titled, "Mom, Don't Hurt Me," was later posted to social media on March 20, 2011. While there is nothing overly inappropriate in the video, there are moments during the walk where Christine appears to be distressed. The creator of the video seems to imply that Christine is harming her children, but in reality, she is struggling with anxiety. Christine is under increasing pressure, and there are people trying to break her emotionally. Despite the difficult circumstances, she remains strong for her children, especially with the support of her new partner, Gerald, as she had no one else to turn to. In December 2011, David's father, Thomas Matus, unexpectedly arrived at Christine's home. She was not home at the time, leaving the girls alone. They were terrified to see their grandfather at the door, banging on the windows and doors. The children still remembered the traumatic experience of being kidnapped and the painful moments they endured while with their father and grandmother. in the woods. The eldest daughter, Catherine, took charge and led her sisters to a secluded part of the house to hide, although they were still very scared. At that time, Christine's new boyfriend, Gerald, arrived at the house. After a brief argument, Gerald succeeded in forcing Thomas to leave. It was clear that David's father was trying to avoid attracting the attention of the police. However, the situation had a significant psychological impact. From that point on, Christine's family felt unsafe in their own home. They installed surveillance cameras around the house, set up an alarm system, and placed 3 guard dogs at each door. In the older girl's bedroom, they even left a knife for self-defense. Despite these measures, Christine's parents continued to come and monitor the house. To further protect Christine and her children, they felt the need to increase security, but nothing seemed to alleviate their fears. Christine eventually decided to sell her house and move away, finding a place where she and her children could be safe from detection. She put the house up for sale and began looking for a new home, far from the city. Christine confided her worries and plans to move to her pen pal, Cindy, but she did not know that Cindy was David's girlfriend. David not only communicated with his sister Amy, but also with his mother Lenore and his girlfriend Cindy. These individuals were involved in organizing the dissemination of rumors online that affected Christine. Cindy gathered information directly from Christine and shared it with Amy. Despite the claims of how cruel David was, Cindy continued to date him, had feelings for him, and supported him during David's time in prison when she visited him. Cindy eagerly awaited his release, but while he was incarcerated, she wasted no time in gaining Christine's trust at his request. This allowed her to learn all about the address of Christine's house and her family's intentions. Cindy knew the location of the surveillance cameras and their coverage, as well as the plans to sell the property. 4 months before David was released from prison, his family began planning a more sinister attack on Christine's home. Although Christine was unaware of their intentions, she felt that something was wrong. This feeling may have stemmed from the increased activity of David's family around her home. At times, she wondered if she was being paranoid. However, her fears were well-founded. She was indeed being watched and targeted. During this time, Christine confided in several friends and family members about her belief that David's family wanted to harm her. Determined to protect herself, she took action. She created a rope ladder for her daughters and devised an escape plan in case an intruder entered the house. With David's imminent release from prison, she predicted that her family might be attacked. Christine shared her plan with her daughters. If anyone from David's family showed up at their door, she would signal the children to warn them and stop the intruders downstairs, while her daughters would escape to safety using a rope ladder from their second-story window. They had devised a plan and practiced it almost every day during their free time to ensure that they would not make any mistakes in a critical situation. All the girls were thoroughly prepared for the attack. As David's release date approached, Christine's anxiety grew. She personally drove her children everywhere, not allowing them to be home alone. The children were terrified for their family's safety. On April 13, 2012, David, after serving 5 years of probation, was released from prison. He moved in with his family in Ed Couch, Texas. There, he wrote a letter to his sister Amy outlining his next steps. Christine was due in court again for a routine hearing on child custody issues. David refused to support the children financially, leaving Christine in dire financial straits as she struggled to work while constantly caring for them. Christine had spent a lot of money to secure her home and, as a result, had to file for alimony. She was extremely nervous about seeing David again. Her boyfriend, Gerald, had offered to accompany her to court, but she had promised to bring her best friend, Beth, who was always there for her. Christine wanted to avoid provoking her ex-husband David in court again, so she declined Gerald's offer. She did not realize that she could be in danger that day. Tragically, the situation escalated. Around 8 a.m., she arrived at the courthouse, where Beth was waiting for her at the entrance. They walked in together and went through the metal detector. As Christine entered, she was suddenly confronted by a man whose face she did not recognize. Suddenly, he pulled out a gun and shot her in the chest. She died right there in the lobby of the courthouse. The next bullet was aimed at Beth, who was with Christine. She tried to run away, but did not have enough time and ended up being an unintended victim. Meanwhile, a gunfight broke out, causing chaos and injuring 2 police officers. Despite this, the officers were able to stop the attacker, wounding him as he tried to leave the building. When he realized he could not escape, he turned the gun on himself and took his own life. However, it was not David who was shot, but his father, Thomas Matusiewicz. The police investigating the case realized that the situation was not yet resolved. They believed that there was a plan to kidnap the children, putting them in danger. They needed to quickly locate all the girls. The police went to the school that Christine's children attended. When the police arrived, David was already at the school and was later arrested. He denied knowing anything about his father's plan. The police did not believe him because it was clear that he knew about the situation. David and his father went to the courthouse, but David did not enter during the incident. Instead, he waited in the car near the building to pick up his father, Thomas. After the shooting, he quickly went into the school to pick up his daughters. Despite knowing that his father was discovered by the police and ended his own life, David remained cold and emotionless, determined to carry out his plan. David's car contained a large number of weapons, which he must have noticed while driving. In addition, a red notebook was discovered in the car, containing a detailed list. He escaped the attack only because he was in the car. Lenora and Amy were taken from their Maryland hideout and brought to the police station for questioning. David's mother and sister also claimed that they knew nothing about Thomas's plan. FBI agents then searched the David family home, where they discovered thousands of pieces of evidence indicating that the plot against Christine had been in the works for months. It was clear that the David family had not completed their plan even after Christine's death. They intended to take the children out of school and smuggle them out of the country. The only way to stop them was through arrest, but at that time, there was not enough evidence against Lenora's mother and Amy, so they had to be released, although they were placed under surveillance. 2 days after Christine's murder, Amy Gonzalez quickly filed for custody of her children, but her request was denied. On February 21, Lenora Matusiewicz appeared in court to defend her late husband, denying any involvement in the plot or persecution. She explained that Thomas had suffered from a meningioma brain tumor, which had caused his behavior to change dramatically. He often acted aggressively, was prone to anger, and struggled to control himself. Lenora claimed that this was why he reacted so violently toward Christine, believing that he had nothing to lose and was trying to protect his son and granddaughter. However, Lenora could not explain why her husband killed Beth, who had nothing to do with the situation. She maintained that she had no knowledge of Thomas's intentions and that he had acted alone. To support her case, Lenora once again accused Christine Belford of being a bad and immoral mother. Knowing that Christine could no longer defend herself against these accusations, Lenora claimed that David's 3 daughters had been repeatedly abused by their mother and that the daughters had shared this information with her. On August 18, 2013, Lenora recorded evidence of Christine's involvement in the abuse. According to her notes, Amy uploaded a video of Christine to social media. However, this did not support Lenora's actions. Later, both Lenora and Amy were arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit murder, but they did not comment on the situation and maintained their innocence. Preparations for the trial were delayed due to the large amount of evidence that needed to be reviewed. Finally, on June 11, 2015, the trial began. The prosecution collected more than 600 pieces of evidence related to the David family's conspiracy, including the murder weapon, thousands of bullets, and photographs and videos documenting Christine's whereabouts. Emails between David's family members that were presented to the court showed that they had intermediaries to gather information. The key figures was Cindy and Courtney, both of whom were David's mistresses. David was the main player in the scheme. He convinced Cindy to befriend Christine and monitor her activities. This gave Cindy access to Christine's private social media pages, where she could see all of Christine's photos and videos of her friends. This information was crucial to the family's plans. Courtney, another mistress, watched Christine's home and filmed videos to gather damning evidence. However, she was unable to capture anything incriminating in the videos she took. On one occasion, Christine was filmed gently pulling her daughter's hand during a game. The Davids tried to portray this as child abuse, but their claims were not convincing, and no one believed them. The Davids' defense was that they were trying to protect the children from their manipulative mother, Christine. The prosecutor's office had a key advantage: Christine's children, who could provide crucial testimony to support the prosecution. Christine's eldest daughter from her first marriage testified. She shared her fear that David and his family would stop at nothing to harm her sisters. She had always viewed them as a threat and worried that her mother might face similar dangers. She detailed the persistent fear that David's family had instilled in her family for years. In contrast, David, Lenore, and Amy maintained their own version of events and claimed they had acted to protect the children. The Davids built a convincing story. Then Christine's second daughter testified. She denied all charges against her mother, ultimately clearing Christine's reputation. After the testimony of her second daughter, David's family was at a loss for how to react. Ultimately, David Matusiewicz, Amy Gonzalez, and Lenore Matusiewicz were convicted. They were all sentenced to life in prison without parole. At the time of the sentencing, Lenore was seriously ill and had been diagnosed with a terminal illness. Lenore died in prison at the age of 71. The conviction of the David family was a major victory for Christine's daughters, honoring the memory of their mother as she bravely stood up to a crime family. Christine fought to protect her children, even at the cost of her own life. Now they are safe. After being placed in foster care, the whereabouts of the two daughters are unknown. Christine's eldest daughter, now an adult, remained in Delaware, where she became a mother and hoped to reunite with her younger sisters. Both of David's lovers, Cindy and Courtney, testified against him at trial. They claimed that David had manipulated them. Because they cooperated with the investigation, they were cleared of all charges.